never thought I'd hear my own obituary before I died. But there it was, read out loud at a church service I wasn't invited to, for a death that hadn't happened. My name, my birth date, even the hymn I once whispered I'd want playing. In the garden. They got that part right. Everything else was a lie. I was sitting in a motel room 2 towns over, watching the rain snake down the window pane like it was trying to escape the glass. I held a vending machine coffee in one hand and a crumpled funeral program in the other. My face, smiling up from that cheap glossy paper like I was at peace. You ever feel yourself disappear while you're still breathing? That's what it felt like I had slipped off the edge of the world and no one had noticed. Or worse, they noticed and preferred it that way. I'd been staying in that motel for 3 days already. The carpet smelled like mildew, the lights flickered when the heater clicked on, and the woman at the front desk only spoke when absolutely necessary. But it was quiet. And after what they did, I needed quiet. My son called me a burden last Thanksgiving. He thought I didn't hear it, said it in the kitchen under his breath, just loud enough for his wife to nod. I was sitting right there on the other side of the wall, polishing silverware with trembling hands. A burden. 67 years of giving, and now I was something to be carried and put down when convenient. I spent my life cooking for people who never once asked what I liked to eat, raising babies who grew into strangers, wiping noses and folding laundry while my dreams went stale in a drawer with my wedding china. And for what? So they could fake my death and cash out my life like a scratch-off ticket? The night I left, I didn't even take everything, just the essentials, my arthritis meds, my address book, my cash stash in the coffee tin. I left the house key on the table. I didn't plan on going far, just far enough that I couldn't hear the lies anymore. I rented the motel room under my maiden name. The girl behind the desk didn't ask questions. Maybe she saw the kind of tired I was, the kind that isn't just about sleep. It was my granddaughter, who found me. I should have known she'd come. Abby always had more of me in her than the others, more heart, more fire. She knocked on the door just once, and when I opened it, she didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She just stepped inside and hugged me like I was still real, like I still mattered. She said they'd had a service, said the whole family came, said they cried like it meant something, said the life insurance claim had already been filed. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. Then I cried. That's when the shame hit, not theirs, mine, for letting it all happen, for going so quiet they could erase me and think no one would notice. You don't wake up one day and find yourself invisible. It happens in pieces. First, they stop asking your opinion. Then they talk over you. Then your background noise. Then a ghost. I used to be the glue. Sunday dinners didn't happen unless I cooked. Christmas wasn't real until I pulled the ornaments from the attic. They used to need me. But I guess people don't miss the glue until everything falls apart. I remember the day I realized I was alone in that house, even when it was full. My son came home late, didn't even take off his shoes, mud all over my clean floor. I pointed it out, gently. He looked at me like I was a nuisance, like I was the dirt. That's when I stopped speaking up. Every time I said something, it felt like I was holding out my heart and they were handing it back, still bleeding. So when Abby handed me that funeral program, I didn't feel surprised. I felt confirmed, like everything I feared about being invisible had become true in print. But what I didn't expect was how calm I felt after, how clear. It's like once someone declares you dead, you're finally free to live. I sat there, in that room that smelled like wet wool and loneliness, and I started to write. Nothing fancy, just a letter. To myself. To the woman I forgot I was. I wrote, "You are not a burden. You are a whole life, a mother, a friend, a dreamer, a woman who deserves more than to be hidden like a receipt." And as I read it out loud, my voice cracked. Not from sadness, from rust. I hadn't heard myself speak kindly in years. Later that night, I remembered a pair of earrings my husband gave me the first year we were married. Turquoise drops. Nothing extravagant, but the way he smiled when he clasped them on me? That moment was worth more than gold. I hadn't worn them in a decade. I pulled them from the bottom of my bag and put them on. Looked at my reflection in the motel mirror. I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the woman they buried. The woman who danced barefoot in the kitchen. I think betrayal isn't just about what they do to you. It's about how long you keep letting them do it. And when you finally say, enough, the world doesn't collapse. It expands. That night, I fell asleep without the TV on, without the weight of trying to be useful. I wasn't useful. I was just me. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. But don't get me wrong, peace didn't come easy. There's a kind of rage that comes with resurrection, a hunger to be seen so fiercely it borders on violence. I wanted to scream, to storm back in that church and rip the lies from their mouths. But I didn't. I sat still. I let the storm pass, inside me. Then I planned. Because when you've already been buried once, you learn how to unearth yourself. Not with vengeance, with clarity, with the kind of grace that makes people uncomfortable because it holds a mirror to their cruelty. I didn't want to punish them. I wanted to remind them I was never theirs to erase. They thought they ended my story. What they did was start a new chapter. My life of giving, let me tell you about the choices I made, the ones nobody noticed, because they blended into the wallpaper of family life. I was 19 when I gave up art school to take care of my mother. She'd had a fall, shattered her hip, and Daddy was already gone by then. I was supposed to head to Chicago, paint, maybe open a studio with my best friend Jean. But I stayed. Of course I stayed. She needed me, and that's what daughters do, right? You fold up your dreams and tuck them behind the casserole dish. You say next year. And then you say it again and again. And one day, it's 30 years later, and you haven't touched a paintbrush since. My relationship with Michael, my son, began the moment I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, holding that test in my hand, like it was a sacred thing. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I just looked at it and thought, I will give him everything. And I did. I gave him my time, my sleep, my career, my body, my laughter. I gave him every last ounce of softness I had, even when I didn't have any left. And when he cried in the middle of the night, I ran. When he scraped his knee, I kissed it like magic. When he needed lunch money, I handed it over without asking if I'd have enough for groceries. I gave. That was the job. But before I became everyone's caretaker, I used to be me. I liked the smell of pine in the winter, wore cinnamon, lipstick, and drank my coffee black with a spoonful of honey. I used to walk barefoot in the garden just to feel the earth between my toes. There was a time I played piano, badly, but I played it anyway, and sometimes I danced in the kitchen when no one was home, just me and the radio and the soft creak of old wooden floors under my feet. I was loud once, not with my voice, but with the way I took up space. And then slowly I started shrinking. Not all at once, just a little at a time. A favor here, a compromise there, an apology I didn't owe. That's how you disappear. You do it politely. The first time I noticed something wasn't right, it was small. So small I almost let it slide. Michael had come over for dinner, brought his wife and the kids. We were sitting at the table, and he mentioned how hard things were financially. I offered to help. Just a little, a check. Something to get them through. His wife didn't thank me. She took the envelope and changed the subject. I remember thinking, maybe she's just shy. But then it happened again. And again. Until one day, I realized I wasn't helping anymore. I was expected. My kindness wasn't kindness anymore. It was currency. I remember one Tuesday afternoon, I was making lemon bars. My granddaughter Abby always loved them. said they tasted like summer. I was zesting the lemons when I heard Michael on the phone in the other room. He was talking to someone about clearing space in the house. My house. Said I'd be better off in a care home. I stood there, zesting, and my hand didn't even stop. But my chest did, just for a moment, like my heart skipped a beat trying to protect me from hearing what I already knew. That they weren't thinking about what was best for me. They were thinking about what was easiest for them. The thing about giving is, no one tells you how addictive it is. You become dependent on being needed. It makes you feel useful, like, you matter. And when the needing stops, when they start looking at you like an obligation instead of a blessing, it hits harder than anything else. It feels like being exiled from a country you built with your bare hands. I used to tuck them in at night. Now they were discussing where to tuck me away. People talk a lot about motherhood as this sacred role. And it is. But what they don't tell you is that being a mother means putting yourself last so often, you forget what it's like to be first. You forget what your favorite song is because the radio's always set to someone else's station. You forget how to cook for one because you've been feeding armies your whole life. You forget that you're allowed to want things, just for you, not because someone else needs them. And the thing is, I didn't mind, not at first. I loved my family. Still do, in some strange, exhausted way. But love isn't supposed to be a leash, it's supposed to be a bridge. And I realized I had spent decades building bridges, only for them to set fire to the other side and tell me it was too much work to cross. So I stood there, in my own house, surrounded by photographs of birthdays and graduations and Sunday picnics. And I felt like a ghost at my own memorial. I kept thinking, maybe if I just held on a little longer, maybe if I baked their favorite meals, if I smiled more, if I stayed quiet, maybe they'd remember who I was. But it doesn't work like that. You can't remind people to see you. They either do or they don't. And I started to wonder if they ever truly had, or if I'd just been the wallpaper in their story, something always there until they got tired of the pattern. There was a time, God, I remember this so clearly, when Michael was about 7. He had the flu. High fever, shaking, wouldn't eat. I sat beside his bed all night with a bowl of water and a cloth, cooling his forehead every 15 minutes. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just watched him breathe, counting each inhale like it was sacred. And when he finally opened his eyes and whispered, "Thanks, Mama," I thought, this is what love is. But now I wonder if that kind of love is a one-way street. If maybe I gave it away like a song no one remembered how to hum. I used to think that was my purpose, giving. But what happens when giving becomes your whole identity? When the people you raised start treating your love like an ATM they can withdraw from without even saying thank you? That kind of depletion doesn't happen all at once. It's death by 1,000 kindnesses, one forgotten birthday, one missed phone call, one polite, "Can you just watch the kids for a few hours?" That turns into 6. And then they forget to come back for you. They called it doing what's best for Mom. That's what they told the insurance company. I'm sure that I was declining, that I needed structure, that they were helping. But the truth is, they wanted the money more than they wanted me. And that's the part I can't wrap my head around. Not the betrayal, not even the lies, but the fact that they thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd go quietly into that good night and not raise a fuss, that I wouldn't matter enough to raise hell. Well, they were wrong. The deeper cut. What really broke me wasn't the money. It wasn't the lies or the fake funeral or even the way they said my name in the past tense. What broke me, truly, deeply, was the day I found the papers. Tucked inside an old recipe book in the kitchen, right behind the one from Meatloaf. My Meatloaf, the one Michael always said reminded him of childhood. That book had stains on it from decades of dinners, and I hadn't looked in it in years. But I was cleaning out the drawers, like I did when I was feeling invisible, because scrubbing counters is easier than confronting a broken heart, and There they were, folded, crisp, too clean to have lived there long, insurance forms, with my name at the top. Signature lines already signed. My body felt it before my mind caught up. My knees went out first. I sank to the floor like someone had pulled a string in my back. The tile was cold against my hands, and the world went quiet, like it does when something sacred is broken. My vision tunneled, and I could only see the black ink on those white pages, policy number, date, my date of death, already written. They had planned it, not just imagined it, not just joked about it, planned it, executed it, celebrated it. I don't remember how long I sat there. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. I held those pages like they were a child I couldn't save. My name stared back at me, proof that I wasn't even mine anymore. They had taken my life and turned it into a transaction, a payout, a windfall. All those years of bedtime stories and packed lunches and late-night fevers and birthday cakes boiled down to a line item in an insurance claim. Alone in my room that night, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been denying for months, maybe even years. They didn't see me anymore. Not really. I was useful once, then inconvenient, then replaceable, and now, gone. It's a strange kind of mourning, grieving yourself while your heart still beats. I pulled my old quilt over my knees, the one my own mother made me when I left for college. It still smelled faintly of lavender. That scent always reminded me of safety, but nothing felt safe anymore, not even my memories. And yet, in that quiet, something else stirred. A different kind of memory, one I hadn't visited in decades. I was 10 years old, standing on a wooden stage in my school auditorium. I was reading a poem, something about stars and silence, and my knees were shaking so badly I thought I'd collapse. But then I saw my mother in the front row. She was smiling, not just with her mouth, but with her whole face, and I remember thinking, I'm okay, I can do this, because someone believed I could. That memory hit me like sunlight through dirty windows. For a second, I could breathe again. I couldn't help remembering how different things were when my children were little. Back when love still had that fresh paint smell. When hugs were given freely and bedtime kisses weren't obligations. I used to sing them to sleep, rub their backs in slow circles until their breathing deepened. I remember holding Michael's hand on the way to his first day of school. He was so scared, but he didn't cry. Just squeezed my fingers 3 times, our little code for I love you. And now that same hand had signed my life away. Funny how love can live inside betrayal, like that, tucked into the corners like old dust. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to wait around and watch my life be written by people who only remembered me when they needed something. I wasn't going to be a chapter in someone else's story, folded neatly, between the mortgage and the inheritance. I deserved better. Not because I was perfect, not because I'd never made mistakes, but because I was still here. I was still breathing, still fighting, and damn it, that had to count for something. I stood up. Slowly. My joints ached like old wood, but I stood. I gathered the papers, folded them back up with care, not out of respect for them, but for myself. Because even in betrayal, I would not be careless with my own name. I placed them in a manila envelope and slid them under the bed, not to forget, but to remind myself that survival doesn't always look like running. Sometimes, it looks like standing still long enough to feel everything you've buried, and then choosing to rise anyway. I looked around the room, the dusty photo frames, the quilted pillows, the dent in the armchair where I used to sit and read to the grandkids. It all felt like a museum of a life that used to mean something. But it wasn't dead yet. I wasn't dead yet. And I made a quiet promise to myself, right then and there. I would not spend another day waiting to be remembered. I would not whisper anymore. I would not ask for permission to be seen. The pain didn't go away. Don't let anyone tell you that clarity makes things easier. If anything, it sharpens the blade, but it also hands it to you, and you get to choose what to cut away. I chose silence. I chose shame. I chose every last shred of guilt I had been wearing like a winter coat in July. I chose to set it down. And in its place, I picked up something else, something fragile, something fierce. I picked up myself. Baby steps toward myself. I used to think the hardest thing I'd ever do was leave that house. But it wasn't leaving. It was staying gone. It was walking into a police station with trembling knees and asking for help, knowing full well they might laugh me out the door. That morning, I wore the turquoise earrings again, not because I felt brave, but because they reminded me of someone who once danced in the kitchen without caring if anyone saw. I walked up to the counter like I belonged there, like I was more than an old woman with a story too strange to believe. And when I said what I came to say, I'm not dead and my family faked my death, my voice didn't crack once. You'd think that's a small thing, but to me, it was a mountain. I sat across from the detective, hands folded tight so no one would see them shake. He asked questions, some gentle, some sharp, some that made me feel like he thought I was losing my mind. But then he looked at me, really looked, and said, "You're not crazy for being angry." That hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long convincing myself I was overreacting, that maybe this was just how things were now, that women like me, mothers like me, were meant to be quiet. But hearing that simple truth, that I was allowed to be angry, felt like someone handed me a match and told me it was okay to light the dark. That anger didn't burn hot right away. It simmered under everything else, shame, sadness, confusion. But it grew. One night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror, and I let myself feel it fully for the first time. Not guilt-ridden, not watered down, not hidden behind polite words. I was angry that they signed my name without asking, angry that I became invisible while still breathing, angry that I gave until I had nothing left but dust. And in that moment, I realized something strange. Feeling anger didn't make me cruel. It made me human. The next step was harder than I expected. My cousin Carol showed up at the motel, claiming she wanted to check on me. She always was nosy, always liked sticking her nose where it didn't belong. When I told her what happened, what I found, she laughed. Just like that. A soft, airy sound, like I was telling a joke. "Oh, come on," she said, waving a hand. "They probably just messed up the paperwork. Don't be dramatic." I stared at her, stunned. That word, dramatic, like it erased everything, like my pain was just theater. I stood up, slow and steady, and I told her to leave. Not politely. Not with tears, with finality. And when she rolled her eyes and muttered, "Whatever," I added, "Don't come back." I changed the locks that afternoon. The landlord raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. I guess he'd seen enough people start over to know better than to pry. Sliding the new key into the door felt different, like I was locking something out instead of keeping it safe. Maybe that's what healing is, deciding who gets access to your life and who doesn't. For years, I let everyone in, let them walk all over me like I was a hallway instead of a home. But not anymore. If someone couldn't see me, couldn't hear me, couldn't respect me, I wasn't going to beg them to stay. And then there was Detective Ruiz. I didn't expect much when I met him. Cops have a way of looking at older people like we're either harmless or half crazy. But he didn't. Treat me like a burden. He treated me like a person who had been wronged. He took notes. He asked follow-up questions. He even brought me coffee once, black with honey, the same way I liked it back when I still remembered how to order for myself. He believed me, not just the facts, but the feelings. He understood that betrayal isn't just about what's done, it's about what it takes from you. And he didn't act like I should be grateful just because he listened. Not everyone saw it his way. My mother called me 2 days later, voice tight with disappointment. "You're turning on your family?" she asked, like I had committed some kind of crime worse than being erased. "This will ruin Michael. Do you want that? Do you want to shame your own blood?" I held the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to cry, to explain that I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was trying to save myself, but I didn't. I just said, "No, I don't want to ruin him. I want to remind him I was never his to erase." And I hung up. That was the first time I chose myself over their approval. And it didn't feel cruel. It felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 67 years. I kept going. Each day I did something small, something that reminded me I existed. I bought groceries without checking if anyone else liked the brand. I walked outside without apologizing for taking up space. I read a book and didn't skim ahead just so I could finish faster. These weren't big acts of rebellion. They were baby steps toward myself, toward the woman who used to dance in the kitchen, toward the girl who loved cinnamon lipstick and painted dreams on napkins before dinner, toward the mother who gave everything, but who also deserved to be seen. And slowly, I started to believe that I mattered. Not because of what I could give, not because of what I could do for others, but simply because I was here, still breathing, still fighting, still learning how to take up space again. And maybe that's what freedom looks like. Not fireworks or grand gestures, but standing in your own doorway with a key in your hand and knowing, this is mine, my life, my voice, my rules. The truth I couldn't ignore. I found the rest of it in a shoebox under Michael's bed. Not that I went looking, I was just trying to make the room look lived in again, pretending I still belonged there. But when I pulled out an old pair of his sneakers, something else came with them. A box, neatly labeled. Mom. Just that. One word. Like my whole life could fit inside a cardboard container and be filed away like tax records. I opened it slowly, like I knew what was inside before I even saw it. And sure enough, there it was. Bank statements, insurance forms, medical records forged by someone who didn't even bother to get the dates right. It was all there. Proof that I hadn't just been forgotten. I had been stolen from. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, flipping through those pages like they were a puzzle I could solve if I just read them one more time. Every number, every signature, every line. Item felt like another betrayal. They weren't just faking my death, they were building a case for it. Creating a story where I had already slipped away quietly, where they were the grieving family, the poor souls left behind with nothing but memories and paperwork. But I wasn't gone. I was sitting in the same house I raised him in, holding proof that he had planned this long before I ever started feeling invisible. And somehow, that made it worse. The knowing, the premeditation. Who am I if my whole life was bankrolled by a lie? That question hit me like cold water. I had spent 67 years believing I was a mother, a daughter, a woman who gave everything she had to the people she loved. But now, I looked at that history and wondered, was any of it real? Were the hugs real? The birthdays? The tears when I thought I failed as a parent? Or were they all part of the script, written by people who saw me not as a person but as a resource? That box held more than documents. It held the truth about how little I mattered to the people I gave everything to. And that truth didn't just hurt, it changed me. I remembered things differently after that. Little moments I used to think were sweet or kind or even just normal suddenly took on a darker shade. My mother used to disappear for weeks at a time when I was growing up. She'd say she was going on retreats, spiritual ones, healing ones, whatever sounded peaceful. But now, seeing how easily my own son erased me, I wondered. Maybe she wasn't on retreat. Maybe she was hiding from the weight of being a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, roles that don't come with instructions on how to keep your identity intact. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Maybe she tried to warn me in her quiet way. I sat there alone in that room and let myself feel it all. Not the guilt, not the shame, not the excuses I used to tell myself so I wouldn't have to face the truth. I let myself feel the pain, the full, unfiltered, raw kind that doesn't care if you're ready for it. I cried, not because I wanted pity, but because I finally allowed myself to grieve. Grieve the mother I thought I was. Grieve the daughter I tried so hard to be. Grieve the life I built that turned out to be a stage set for someone else's gain. And when the crying stopped, I didn't feel empty. I felt seen. For once, someone was finally witnessing my pain, and that someone was me. That night, I made a promise. I would testify, no matter what they said. No matter how many times they called me dramatic, or crazy, or inconvenient. I would stand in front of a judge, in front of strangers, in front of anyone who needed to hear it, and I would tell the truth. Not just about the insurance fraud, not just about the fake death certificate, but about the slow disappearance, about how they made me feel like I was too much until I was nothing, about how love can turn into obligation without anyone noticing, about how easy it is to become invisible when everyone around you stops looking. I wouldn't do it for revenge. I would do it because silence was no longer protection. It was complicity. And maybe that's the hardest part, not just proving the crime, but admitting the cost. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you realize your entire life was built on a foundation that was never yours to build, you have to start over. You have to ask yourself, who am I without the roles? Without the expectations? Without the approval? And that's terrifying. It's like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, with nothing but yourself to hold on to. But I've stood alone before. I've built lives from nothing before. I can do it again. So I gathered the documents. Every last page, I put them in a folder, neat and organized, like I used to do for their school projects when they were kids. Irony has a bitter sense of humor. I walked downstairs and handed them to Abby. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and said, "I'll take care of it." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Because unlike the others, she never asked me to shrink. She never treated my voice like background noise. She saw me, fully, completely. And in that moment, I realized something else. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Turning over those papers didn't erase the hurt. It didn't undo the years of giving until I had nothing left. But it did something else. It reminded me that I still had power. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from truth. From choosing to speak when silence would have been easier. From refusing to be buried twice. Once was enough. This time, I wouldn't just unearth myself. I would stand tall in the open air, let the world see me, let them remember my name. Becoming. My own person. I got a haircut the week before the hearing. Not just any haircut, something sharp, something clean, something that didn't look like it belonged in a family photo from 20 years ago. I walked into the salon with my head held high and told the stylist, "Surprise me." She hesitated for a second, probably expecting me to name a style or show her a picture, but I didn't. I wanted to be surprised too. I wanted to see someone new when I looked in the mirror, and when she was done, I did. The old version of me, the one who wore beige sweaters and parted her hair the same way since college, was gone. In her place sat a woman with confidence in her jawline and color, in her cheeks. I paid her twice what I owed and walked out like I owned the sidewalk. I started wearing color again, real color, not just muted blues or soft grays that blended into wallpaper. I bought a scarf in deep crimson and tied it around my neck like armor. I found a dress in emerald green tucked in the back of a thrift store and wore it like it was meant for me all along. For years, I dressed like someone trying not to take up space. Like I was afraid to be seen. But now, I wanted to be seen. I wanted people to notice me, not because I needed attention, but because I deserved to be noticed. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't fading. I was here. And if that meant clashing with the furniture, so be it. The lawyer met with me every Thursday, a young woman with steady eyes and quiet strength. She didn't talk down to me, didn't treat me like an old lady who needed things explained slowly. She treated me like someone who had been wronged and who knew exactly what she was doing about it. We went over the testimony line by line. She asked questions I hadn't even considered. I answered them without flinching. My therapist came too, sitting beside me like a silent guardian. She helped me separate the fear from the truth, helped me remember that my voice mattered, even if no one had bothered to listen before. Together we built a story, not just about the fraud, but about the life behind it, about how giving until you disappear doesn't make you noble, it makes you erased, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. I reached out to my cousins, ones I hadn't spoken to in years, the ones who never got invited to the holidays, the ones who always asked too many questions, the ones who disappeared from the group texts after asking why I never seemed to visit anymore. I sent them letters first, then emails, then phone calls. Some never wrote back, but some did. One cousin, Eleanor, called me in tears. Said she always wondered why the family stopped talking about me. Said she thought I didn't want to be part of things anymore. We talked for hours, and when I hung up, I felt lighter. Not because they could fix what happened, but because I wasn't alone anymore. There were others who had been kept in the dark, others who saw me clearly, and that made all the difference. Painting came back to me on a rainy afternoon. I bought a canvas and some brushes from a little art shop downtown. The owner smiled like he knew I was coming home. I didn't know what I was going to paint. I just knew I needed to try. I set everything up on the kitchen table and stared at the blank white space for a long time. Then I dipped the brush in blue and dragged it across the page. That was all it took. The floodgates opened. I painted the sky as I remembered it from childhood, wide, endless, full of promise. I painted the garden I used to tend, the one where I'd sit barefoot in the grass and feel the sun like a blessing. I painted hands, mine, holding something other than dishes, holding dreams, and when I stepped back, breathless, I realized I hadn't cried once. I had created, and that was better than healing. That was remembering who I was before anyone tried to erase me. The hearing was approaching like a hurricane I could hear but not see. I could feel it in the air, in the way my lawyer's voice changed slightly when we reviewed the final statements, in the way Abby would glance at me sometimes, like she was holding her breath. I didn't dread it, not anymore. I understood now that this wasn't just about proving their betrayal, it was about declaring mine. About standing in front of everyone and saying, this is what happened, this is what was taken, and this is who I am, even if you forgot. I wasn't afraid of what they might say. They had already buried me once. I came back from that. What more could they do? And maybe that's the most powerful thing about being forgotten. You get the chance to start over. You don't have to live up to expectations. You don't have to wear the mask they handed you. You get to choose what comes next. And I chose color. I chose voice. I chose creation. I chose myself. Not in defiance, not in anger, but in peace, in purpose, in power. I was no longer the mother who gave too much, no longer the daughter who stayed too quiet. I was a woman who had been buried and who learned how to dig herself out, and this time I wasn't just surviving, I was becoming. Finding my voice. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just the air, which smelled like old wood and too much glass, but the way sound traveled through it, sharp and hollow, like nothing in that room could hold warmth. I sat at the witness table with my hands folded, not because I wanted to look composed, but because I needed something to hold on to. My lawyer had warned me it would feel intimidating. She said, "They design these places to make people you feel small." But I wore red on purpose, a deep, unapologetic shade. Something that said, "I am here." Something that said, "You will see me." When they called my name, I stood slowly. My legs didn't shake, not even once. I walked to the stand like I'd rehearsed every step in my head 1,000 times, and maybe I had. Maybe part of me had been preparing for this moment since the day I first realized no one else was going to speak up for me. I looked out at the room, at Michael, at his wife, at my mother, sitting stiff-backed like she still believed this was some kind of misunderstanding. And then I saw him, my uncle, the one who helped forge the documents, who laughed when I asked if he knew anything about the insurance claim. He wouldn't meet my eyes at first, but I waited. I stayed there, under oath, and I held my gaze steady until he finally looked up. And when he did, I didn't flinch. I told my story. Every word came from somewhere deep, someplace I used to think was empty. I started with the funeral program, the one they printed without telling me. The hymn they chose, thinking it made things holy. I talked about the motel room, the vending machine coffee, the quiet that followed betrayal like an echo. I told them how I gave everything, how I raised children who forgot how to love me, how I cooked meals while my own hunger went unnoticed, how I smiled through holidays while my heart cracked quietly inside my chest. I told them how I disappeared, not all at once, but piece by piece, until someone decided to finish what silence had started. I spoke for a long time. No one interrupted. No one tried to stop me. Even the judge listened like he was afraid to breathe too loud. When I got to the part about the papers, the insurance forms, the forged signature, the date of death already written, I stopped for a second. Just a breath. Just enough to remind myself I wasn't back in that kitchen where I found them, that I was here now, in front of people who couldn't ignore me, and that made all the difference. Then I turned toward them, toward my family, toward the ones who thought they could erase me and never answer for it. I looked at Michael straight in the eye. My son, the boy I once held in my arms, who grew into a man who signed my life away, like it meant nothing. And I said it, out loud, in front of everyone. I loved you, I said. My voice didn't crack. It didn't tremble. It just was. I loved you more than I loved myself. More than I loved comfort or peace or even happiness. And what you did, what you all did, it was wrong. The room went still after that. Not the kind of stillness that comes before laughter or applause, but the kind that settles after truth lands hard, heavy, unavoidable. Michael's face changed. I don't know how else to explain it. Like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Like he finally understood what he had done, not just the legal crime, but the human one. His wife covered her mouth with her hand, like that might stop. The guilt from escaping. Abby sat near the back, watching me with pride in her eyes. Quiet pride. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. My mother looked away. She always did that when things got too close to the truth. Pretend she wasn't there. Pretend she hadn't spent years watching me shrink. Pretend she didn't raise a daughter only to let her be stolen from in broad daylight. But it was my uncle who broke first. He cleared his throat like he wanted to say something. Maybe defend himself. Maybe make an excuse. But when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. Because there were no words left. Not anymore. There was only what had been done, and what had been taken. And then, silence. Real silence. Not the kind I used to live in. Not the kind that says, you don't matter. This silence said, you do. It filled the room like water rising, slow, steady, unstoppable. And for once, I didn't try to fill it with apologies or explanations. I let it sit there. Let them sit in it. Let them feel the weight of what I had survived. I didn't testify to win. I testified to be heard, to prove that I had lived, that I still was, that I was more than the roles they assigned me, that I was not just a mother, not just a daughter, not just a burden or a payout or a forgotten name in a fake obituary. I was a woman who had been buried, and I climbed my way out, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with words. And today, in this cold, echoing courtroom, I proved that my voice is not just something I have. It's something I am. My new life. The fallout was louder than I expected. Not from me, never from me, but from them. From the silence breaking wide open like a dam giving way. The courtroom didn't end things. It just exposed them. And after that, everything shifted. Michael stopped speaking to me altogether. His wife sent one letter, just a short note saying she was sorry, but not enough to make up for years of taking more than she gave. My mother moved in with my cousin Carol, who always had a sharp tongue and never understood why I wouldn't just forgive and forget. They called it turning my back on family. But what they don't understand is I wasn't turning away. I was walking toward myself. And strangely, peace followed, not right away. Not like a light switch flipping, but like morning sun easing through curtains, slow and steady. For so long, I thought peace meant having everyone around me happy, that if someone was upset, I had failed. But now I know better. Peace isn't approval. Peace is knowing you did the right thing even when no one else agrees. It's sitting alone at your kitchen table, drinking coffee black with honey, and realizing you're not lonely. You're free. And freedom doesn't owe anyone an explanation. I took my first real trip in over a decade. Just me. No one to check in with. No one to pack extra snacks for. I drove west until the roads got quieter and the trees grew taller. The mountains were waiting like old friends. I rented a cabin with creaky floorboards and a view that stretched beyond anything I could name. There were no televisions, no phones, buzzing with reminders about birthdays I'd forgotten to send cards for, just whined in the pines and stars so close I felt like I could reach out and touch them. I sat outside most nights wrapped in a blanket, listening to the world breathe without needing anything from me. And for the first time in years, I breathed back. There were people who stayed. Not many, but enough. Abby came with me on the second trip, this time to the coast. We walked along the beach barefoot, letting the tide pull sand from under our toes. She didn't talk much, just held my hand sometimes when the waves crashed too loud. My cousin Eleanor wrote letters every week, telling me stories from her garden, and asking how my painting was going. Detective Ruiz sent a postcard once from a conference he attended on elder fraud. On the back, he wrote, "You made a difference." I kept that tucked inside my journal like a secret. And then there was my therapist, still meeting with me even though the case was closed. She said healing doesn't end just because the truth does. But the most powerful moment came one rainy afternoon in my new little apartment, a real one, with windows that opened and walls painted in colors I picked myself. I found the forged death certificate again, buried in a drawer where I kept old paperwork. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the ink with my fingertip. Then I got a matchbook from the kitchen, stepped onto the balcony, and lit it. Watched as the paper curled and blackened and finally turned to ash. I didn't say anything while it burned, didn't cry, didn't whisper a goodbye. This wasn't mourning, it was reclaiming. Proof that I could destroy what tried to erase me and still stand tall in the smoke. That night, I pulled out a blank canvas for the first time in weeks. I dipped my brush in deep blue and let it drag across the page, then red, then gold. I painted. The sky from the mountain cabin, the stars from the beach, the quiet from my balcony. I painted the woman I used to be, the girl with cinnamon lipstick and dreams folded in drawers. And I painted the woman I was becoming. I signed it in the E corner, small but proud, not with my full name, not with the name they gave me or the one they tried to bury. I signed it with the nickname my father used to call me when I was young, Tessie, the part of me that still remembered how to dream. People ask me sometimes what I miss. If I ever look back and wish I could have both, the life I had and the one I'm building now. But I've learned that healing isn't about balance. It's about choice. And I chose me. Every single time. I chose the sound of rain against the window instead of arguing over whose turn it was to clean the attic. I chose the smell of turpentine over perfume bought for holidays. I chose quiet mornings and late-night thoughts and the thrill of signing my own name without checking if someone else approved. I chose to live in color again. In motion. In truth. And maybe that's what growing older really means. Not slowing down, but choosing what matters. Not shrinking into silence, but stepping into voice. Not fading into memory, but shaping the story yourself. I spent most of my life being someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's caretaker. Now I am simply Tessie, a woman who was erased and rebuilt herself from the ground up. A woman who learned that love shouldn't cost you your voice. A woman who discovered that peace doesn't come from fixing what's broken. It comes from refusing to carry it anymore. This is my new life. Not perfect, not easy, but mine. Every last drop, every breath, every bold, unapologetic stroke of it. Looking back, moving forward, the gallery was alive with laughter and light. Not the kind that feels forced, like when someone tells a joke at a family dinner and everyone laughs just to cover the silence. But the real kind, the kind that comes from people who are happy to be in the same room together. I stood near the back, hands clasped in front of me like they always do when I'm trying to pretend I'm not nervous. But I wasn't nervous, not really, just overwhelmed. It's one thing to paint your truth in private, alone with the canvas and the colors. It's another to hang it on the wall for strangers and loved ones to see. Abby found me first. She came up behind me quietly, like she always does when she knows I need space but also company. She didn't say anything right away, just slipped her hand into mine and gave it a squeeze. That's how we've always been, more in tune with what we feel than what we say. Then she whispered, "You did it." And I looked around, really looked, at the walls covered in my paintings. At the people standing in front of them, some whispering softly, others just staring, eyes wide like they were seeing something sacred. My life, my story, my pain turned into color. I hadn't planned for this show to happen. Not exactly. I was painting again, yes, every day if I could, but mostly for myself. It was Eleanor who suggested it, said, "People need to see what you're making. This isn't just art, Tessie. It's healing." So I let her help me organize it. We picked a small gallery downtown, modest but warm with soft lighting and wooden floors that creaked underfoot. Abby insisted on printing the program. Ruiz sent a note saying he wished he could come, but he'd be watching from afar. He still checks in sometimes, like he's keeping an eye out for the woman who taught him that justice isn't always loud. It can be quiet and powerful too. And then there they were, my people. Not all of them, of course. Some I'll never see again. But those who stayed, they were here. They filled the room with presence, not just bodies. My cousin Eleanor already, sipping wine and explaining one of my paintings to a stranger like she was its personal docent. Abby's boyfriend, Jake, leaning against the wall with a smile so wide it made his whole face glow. A few new friends I'd met through therapy, the ones who didn't flinch when I talked about betrayal or loss. Even Detective Ruiz's daughter showed up, wearing a dress that matched the sky in my mountain painting. She said her father had told her about me. That meant more than I expected. When the time came for the toast, Abby raised her glass without ceremony. No microphone, No speech. Just her voice carrying across the room like it knew it needed to reach every corner. To Tessie, she said, smiling straight at me. To resilience. To courage. To choosing yourself even when the world tried to erase you. And everyone echoed the words like they meant them, like I mattered. And in that moment, I smiled, not the polite small smiles I used to give when someone thanked me for hosting another holiday dinner. This was different, brighter, fuller. Like I was finally accepting the warmth instead of deflecting it. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. Tears have their place, but so does joy. And tonight was joy. Real, unfiltered joy. The kind that sits in your chest and makes your ribs feel lighter. I raised my glass with the rest of them, looking around at the faces of the people who saw me, who had seen me before any of this began, and I realized something strange. I didn't feel like I was being celebrated. I felt like I was being, which maybe is even better. As the night went on, I walked from painting to painting, listening to the murmurs, catching bits of conversation. People saw things in my work I hadn't even named to myself. One man said the brushstrokes reminded him of breath returning after drowning. A young woman stood in front of my storm series and said it looked like a woman learning to walk again, after years of crawling. And there was one piece, just a simple study in red and gold, that made a girl wipe tears from her cheeks before turning to her friend and saying, "This is what survival looks like." I stopped in front of my favorite piece, the one I called Tessie. It was a self-portrait, not literal, but emotional. A swirl of blues and greens with streaks of firelight running through it like veins. In the center, a figure stood barefoot on a cliff, arms open wide, facing the horizon. I painted it after the mountain trip, when I first started believing I could live beyond them. When I remembered what it felt like to be free, standing there. Now, surrounded by voices and laughter, I understood why I painted it. Because freedom doesn't mean you forget the past. It means you carry it differently. Later, I stepped outside for air. The city noise buzzed gently around me, distant but present, like a lullaby playing in another room. I leaned against the railing and looked up at the sky. The stars were barely visible over the city lights, but I imagined them anyway. Imagined the ones I saw in Colorado, the ones I watched with Abby on the beach, the ones I used to dream beneath as a child, thinking I knew where my life was going. A voice broke the silence. "It's beautiful in there." Eleanor joined me, holding 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to me without asking. Always knew how to read the room. "Thank you," I said, taking it, "for everything. For believing in me before I believed in myself." She laughed. "That's easy to say now, but I remember when you were still hiding those canvases under the bed, when every time I brought up showing your work, you changed the subject. I thought no one would care," I admitted, "or worse, that they'd look at it and see only the pain." "But they don't," she said gently. "They see the strength." We stood there for a while, just drinking, letting the night settle around us. Eventually she asked, "Where do you go from here?" I looked down the street, toward the darkened buildings and flickering signs, toward the unknown. "Forward," I said simply. "Like always." She nodded. "Good answer." Inside, the crowd cheered again. Someone must have finished a particularly moving piece. I breathed deep, letting the cool night air fill my lungs, grounding me. Tonight felt like a beginning. Not the end of a chapter, but the start of a new book, maybe even a new genre. Michael wasn't here. Neither was my mother, or Carol, or my uncle. None of them reached out after everything settled. Not that I expected them to. There were consequences for what they did, real ones. My uncle ended up in prison, sentenced for forgery and insurance fraud. Michael lost his job. My mother moved in with Carol, last I heard, though I don't know. if she's still there. They didn't try to contact me after the trial, not once. And I'm okay with that. Not in the way people say when they're pretending to be fine. I mean it. Truly, I don't miss them. Don't wonder what they're doing. Don't lie awake wondering if they ever think of me. They made their choice. I made mine. And mine was to live. Fully. Unapologetically. Without shrinking anymore. I won't say the wounds are gone. That's not how healing works. Pain leaves scars. But it also teaches you what matters. And what I've learned is that love should be earned, not assumed. That family isn't automatic. It's built. And sometimes, it has to be rebuilt by walking away from the people who forgot how to hold you. One of the last things I did before the trial was revisit the motel. I stood outside the door of that little room I rented the night I left. I didn't go inside. Didn't need to. Just stood there, looking at the faded sign, remembering who I was when I walked in. A ghost. Someone hollowed out by grief and betrayal. Now I stood there as someone else entirely. Still me, still the mother, still the daughter. But also the painter, the speaker, the survivor, the woman who refused to stay buried. I left flowers outside the door that night, not for the motel itself, but for the version of me that died in that room, not really dead, just transformed. Rebirth often begins in darkness, and that tiny, cracked motel had held my rebirth like a cocoon. If you'd told me a year ago I'd find strength in betrayal, I'd have called you crazy. If you'd told me I'd stand in front of a room full of people raising a glass to myself, I'd have laughed until my ribs ached. But here I am. Here I stand, not erased, not forgotten, not hidden, alive, loud, seen, and for the first time in a long time, completely, undeniably free.